Hello, my name is Ash and this is Amber, and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be talking about my most listened to podcast of the year. Apparently, according to Spotify, I have listened to 1,905 minutes of this podcast, so I cannot say enough good things about it. I'm always going on about hope in this channel. Obviously that's part of the name. Because it's been an essential ingredient in my recovery so far, and I think it's so important because without hope we lose belief that recovery is possible, and without belief we lose the motivation to try new things, and obviously without trying new things it's very difficult to move forwards. So where I have cultivated a lot of my hope from these past couple of years has been from listening to the Chronic Comeback podcast. This podcast, hosted by Phil Hadfield, was set up by him to show that comebacks are possible in any situation, and in fact your life can become even better as a result of the setback. And on his podcast he interviews people that have proven this. And something I really like about the podcast is that he interviews all sorts of people struggling with all sorts of chronic illnesses, different forms of severity, different backgrounds, and sometimes the stories, they feel like they could be my own. They're so relatable. And then at other times there's people with severe illness who have been bedbound for years, and even they make a full comeback. And it just hearing these things just gives me incredible hope. And what's also really nice is that it demonstrates the multitude of ways that it's possible to heal through. I have heard all sorts on this podcast, and I'm often sitting with a notepad and paper writing down different things, different therapies that people talk about, different books that they recommend. So it's really interesting. It just shows that you just need to keep trying new things, and one day something's going to work for you. And it actually reminds me of a quote that I posted recently by Thomas Edison: when you have exhausted all possibilities, remember this: you haven't. And this podcast is evidence of that. And it shows that if you're facing a chronic illness right now, you absolutely can get better. And lastly, Phil is an incredible host. What's really interesting is that he is still recovering from Lyme's disease and some other issues. So for me, listening to the podcast, it almost feels like I'm going through this journey with him. And as someone who still isn't fully well yet, he asks all the questions that I want to ask. And it's done in such an optimistic but realistic tone as well. So it's just a lovely podcast to listen to. So I highly recommend that you grab this podcast with both arms. Check it out on YouTube, Spotify, or pretty much any other podcast platform, it seems. It's got me through some really hard times. On those days where I feel like, is recovery possible? Am I ever going to get through this? I stick on one of his podcasts, and it just reminds me that if these people can do it, then I flipping well can too. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. This channel is all about sharing things that have given me hope and my tips for recovery. So I am really happy to recommend the Chronic Comeback podcast. And Phil, if you listen to this, thank you for creating such a wonderful, optimistic, positive, hope-driven podcast. It has got me through very hard times, and I'm very grateful for this, and to everyone that shares their story on that podcast. So that is all for today. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.